Hello survivors and welcome to Medicine 4, a Parasite Eve podcast by Resident Evil fans for Resident Evil fans. This is First Aid Spray bonus episode 23, and in this episode we'll be finding our innate abilities lurking inside of our mitochondria as we look back on the PS1 gem Parasite Eve. I'm your host, and joining me in New York City this week, he's been waiting and biding his time for this episode, lurking in the mitochondria of the show itself. It's Fire Button Steve Valance.
Is this where my face splits open and I grow a second head and all the other gangly gooey bits, or is it, nah, hi everybody?
If you like. From you. And created when the sentient mitochondria of a beef patty was fused with an airbrush, it's Michael Burger time early.
Is it hot in here, or is it just me?
The subject of this bonus episode, like all others, was voted on by our Patreon backers. Support the show now to not only help keep us afloat, but also to create new content. Select what that content is and hear it a month before everyone else. Tiers begin at just $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/FASprayPod for the full breakdown. Quick shout out at the top of the show, of course, as we like to do. Usually with bonus episodes, we'll either have some file readings to break things up or a piece of music. We're going to talk about Parasite Eve soundtrack. Spoiler alert, it's pretty good. So we had to put some music in here. So thank you to Lily Arciniega, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, for their remix of Plosive Attack that really caught our eye. So special thanks to them letting us use that in this episode. Check out their channel for the full version, and there's at least one more Parasite Eve remix in there, and plenty of other covers and cool musical stuff. So thank you for that. And also, this episode, as I just said, brought to you by our Patreon backers who voted on this. The theme of the poll was PS1 classic horror. Parasite Eve absolutely destroyed it. Not overly surprised, as it's a game that does have its own core audience, its own legacy. It might not be as massive as, say, a Silent Hill or a Resident Evil, but it definitely got its fans. So yeah, excited to talk about it. As a bit of a background, Parasite Eve was actually first a book, don't you know? Published in 1995 from the novelist Hideaki Seina. It actually won awards in Japan, Best Horror Novel, and it was adapted into a TV film in 1997, which I think is available with English subtitles. I don't think it ever got a dub, but there is an English subbed version. It's actually quite revered. I was quite surprised by this, but it's very well revered in Japan as part of the J-horror boom. So what I mean by that is stuff like The Ring is obviously the big example that came overseas in a big way. But obviously it's around the same time. And the video game version was published by Square in 1998 in Japan and America, and it acts as a sequel to the book/film. It references the book/film, but it sets the story outside of Japan in New York City. A star-studded crew on this one. Producer Hironobu Sakaguchi, who you know probably as the sort of godfather of Final Fantasy. The director was Takashi Takito, that you might know from Live Alive, Chrono Trigger, etc. Head designer was Tetsuya Nomura, who was, you know, the big designer of Square at that period up until today, really. And the music by the legendary composer Yoko Shimomura in what is described as her breakout project. In terms of review scores, the game did pretty well. It's a little bit all over the place. Famitsu gave it 33 out of 40, which is pretty decent. CVG, 3 out of 5. Next Generation, 3 out of 5. IGN, 7 out of 10. So, yeah, decent scores, but not mind-blowing. It has a Metacritic of 81 out of 100 currently. And in Japan, it was the 6th best-selling game of 1998 with nearly 1 million copies, which is pretty good indeed. So let's talk about our early experiences with Parasite Eve. Burger, for quite obvious reasons, I'm going to start with you. What's your early memories of Parasite Eve?
This is one of the few games I remember actually owning on the PlayStation 1. I played it quite a bit. I will admit that I probably didn't get a lot of the subject matter as a wee human of, 12, 13 maybe.
Yeah.
At the time, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I remember beating it. I remember being one of the first people in my class to beat it because I happened to have a PlayStation in my room, so I got to spend a nice long long weekend, losing sleep, missing out on my PBS anime, to catch up on it and to finish it out. I couldn't stop playing it. I really enjoyed this game quite a bit. I remember arguing with people too about some specific unlocks that you can get in the late game, because you can beat the game and not be max level.
Yeah.
You can kind of sprint through it pretty quickly. And yeah, there's a... Are we doing spoilers yet?
Maybe not. I don't know. I mean...
I think if they're tuning in for a podcast about Silent Hill, yes, indeed, Parasite Eve, they're on board with spoilers.
25-year-old game.
Yeah.
All right. So in any case, I remember arguing with kids at school about the final unlock that you get, the capstone ability.
Yeah.
Which is her. She transforms and does like 10 hits of damage at like 9999 damage each hit.
Yeah.
And people were like, "Oh no, it's not real." Totally was.
The pre-internet days.
Right.
If you spin I around 3
loaning
times.
the game to a friend, liking it enough to get the sequel. Both sequels I played, the one on the PSP as well.
Mm.
I don't remember much about Parasite Eve 2, but we're not talking about Parasite Eve 2. What do you
Probably-
got? What about y'all?
probably-
Why didn't y'all play it?
Probably for another day. Yeah, so Steve, I'm going to go to you next, because you played this a lot earlier than I did, but obviously, as Berger alluded to there, and I just sort of alluded to in the intro, this game never came out in Europe. We got Parasite Eve 2, we didn't get Parasite Eve 1, so Steve, what's your entry point? Obviously, I guess Parasite Eve 2, but what's your history with Parasite Eve in general?
Okay, so yes, my entry point was Parasite Eve 2, because obviously at the time Square was like, yeah, Parasite Eve, Europeans don't need that. The English don't need that. But yes, we got Parasite Eve 2, and I really enjoyed it. Spoilers for whenever we get to that podcast. And I wanted to learn more. And then, I think I actually talked about going to Forbidden Planet to get books and the S.D. Perry novels. Similar story. I saw the Parasite Eve novel. I thought, oh, I've played the second game. Maybe the first book. It iterates on the first game, not knowing it was a prequel at the time. Read the book. Really enjoyed it. As a Resi fan, it goes deep into the whole science and the twisted re-versions of science they've used for how Eve operates and all that. It's a bit, I want to say, very, not hard sci-fi, but a lot more nerdier than you'd think for a horror novel.
Right.
And then, just a case of it spiraled from there and trying to find a way to play this game. And I was determined to not emulate it for whatever reason, because at that point I had a very anti-emulation stance.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until, I want to say, 3 or 4 years ago when a friend on my Fireboard channel, Aid, pointed out, you could just get an American PSN account and download the game and play it, don't you, Stephen? And then, after astonished gasps and looks, basically it was a bit of a free-for-all trying to find how to get a US PSN download code for a digital wallet, and then download it and play it. So yeah, it's been a 4 years hence have I only just played this game that came out in 1998, because for whatever reason it's not on UK shores. Had a lot of fun. I've also seen the film. That's ashamed to admit I just saw it on YouTube. I don't know what the legal boundaries are. Someone re-uploaded the entire film with subtitles. It was okay. Yeah. Very much a TV drama looking thing with some lengthy build-up. But yeah, my experience with the franchise is something that I started with the sequel that is apparently divisive, and just enjoyed it and went back through time the wrong way around, and only recently played the first game last. And the third birthday doesn't exist.
So I'm told, yeah. Oh yeah, that's cool. It's also not cool because not only did the game not get a physical release, the fact that it's not on digital storefronts still over here is just absolute nonsense, really, isn't it? I'm guessing it still can't get it on PSN without an American account, which is, and who knows if you can even jump through those hoops on current consoles, but it is ridiculous.
I've got a quick question, if I can.
Go for it.
To Berger. Berger, you remember the mini PS1 that was re-released recently? A few years ago. Parasite Eve 1 was on that, wasn't it, for you guys?
I believe it was.
Yeah.
Actually.
That was would have been the perfect breakout opportunity, not
Yeah.
unlike the mini SNES with Starwing 2. Instead, no, just not allowed it for whatever reason. Frustrating. Very frustrating.
Yes. Yeah. Here's one for you. My introduction to Parasite Eve is also Parasite Eve 2. I've never played it, but as a Resident Evil fan of that era, seeing it in magazines and stuff, I was interested also because I was a Final Fantasy fan. So I was like, Squaresoft. I know Squaresoft. It's one of the few companies, outside of Sega and Nintendo that I could immediately point at and be like, oh, I know those guys. And they do those games I like. And now they're doing games about monsters and transformations. And I don't remember if I saw a trailer on a demo disc or anything like that. Or maybe I just animated it in my head. But there's a scene, I believe, early into the game where there's a woman whose face just kind of like opens up a little bit. Let's put it that way. In a traditionally gory, way that you get out of Parasite Eve body horror stuff. And I can see that in my mind's eye. And I also remember seeing almost like still frames of that transformation in a magazine. And I was one of those kids at school that would just like cover like their folder or whatever, or like books and stuff in just stuff like cut out like video game stuff and band logos and stuff like that. And I remember having that with some sellotape over it on a file of just this woman like transforming into a monster. Never played the game, but I was like, it fits my aesthetic as a Resident Evil fan. So that always stood out to me. But yeah, I'd never played any of the games until very recently. Obviously, if you're a long-term First Aid Spray fan, you'll know that we did an episode of Now That's What I Call Survival Horror, where we talk about the music of a game on Parasite Eve. And I hadn't played it before that either, so that was kind of my proper entry point, really, is watching Steve play it a little bit on stream and listening to the soundtrack and discussing that without much context, and now actually finally get to play the game for the first time. So I am the freshest of fresh when it comes to this. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the gameplay of Parasite Eve first. I think that's the most logical place to start. It's not quite as chunky as the story, but there's a lot going on here. In terms of description of genre, it's a role-playing game, but it easily gets lumped with stuff like Resident Evil and survival horror because it has, monsters and body horror in it. Yeah, it's got a very horror theme to it. But it is a role-playing game, and it feels, quite a bit like Chrono Trigger, which is why I mentioned that at the beginning. The director also being the director of Chrono Trigger, you can see the sort of through line to that in the way that the turn-based battles just kind of, instead of going into a turn-based battle where the screen will swirl and you go to somewhere else, some little pocket universe to do the battle, it's where you're standing. But unlike Chrono Trigger, you can like run around and do that kind of stuff. Berger, how do you feel about the battle system in Parasite Eve?
I loved it. It was one of the first games I remember where like range was an issue.
Yeah,
and enemies could like move out of your range. Like you could, in the middle of an attack, an enemy can just like wander outside of it during its attack loop. I will say, seeing you play it recently as we played through it in the Discord. Oh, and
we played it on YouTube. Yeah, it's all over on First Aid Plays. You can watch my playthrough in full. So there you go.
It is interesting to see the variety of like enemy actions. There's attacks I didn't remember enemies having. There's definitely parts of the game where I remembered, oh yeah, that's what that is, and I remember like how to avoid specific monsters and abilities. I will say that it is a victim of its time, which is something I say a lot when I reference games from this era. Just by virtue of the fact that games do stuff better now, so it is kind of hard to go back and find the same enjoyment for stuff like that I did back then. Just in this case, in terms of just how many random battles you ran into.
See,
it felt like almost every screen.
I don't know if I agree with that personally, but I can see your perspective. Absolutely, I've had that experience with plenty of games, but this wasn't overly annoying to me. I've definitely played worse. But but maybe that's because I found the battle system to be really fun and I didn't ever tire of it. It's not an overly long game as well. No. But the battle engagement and like you say, the fact that you have to consider range and you've got to move into range and in and out of range depending on the weapons that you're using and what you're fighting and that kind of stuff. And there's enough variety to the enemies and how they work. And some of them have sort of multiple targets on them, like multiple heads or a tail and that kind of thing. And the boss fights are all fun. That really kept my attention for the whole game.
Yeah.
It's simple and effective, I think. There are definitely systems that want to talk about that do feel dated and clunky and whatever. But in terms of the beautiful simplicity and having a soft spot for turn-based kind of stuff, this really, really landed with me personally. Steve, how do you feel about the battle system?
It definitely feels like it's got a learning curve. I think first time out, if you've only played a Resident Evil game, you're like, what the hell is this dome? I don't understand why anything's working, why I'm not hitting anything.
Yeah.
But once you finally click with it and you realise that it is basically you have to dodge your shots while your meter builds up and then figure out your opening to strike with your weapon at the optimal range, it's actually rather engaging. More complex than, say, Resident Evil 1, 2 or 3 were. Well, 3 with Nemesis maybe had the whole dodge mechanic and stuff, but definitely 1 and 2. Of Resident Evil in comparison. I think Berger hit it on the head though with the sheer variety of enemies, and they all have their own unique patterns of movement and what they can do is good. The boss fights themselves are like, they vary in quality, but a lot of them have their own unique attacks and things where a player has to actually think. You can't just stand in place, or if you are going to stand in place, you need to measure what buffs you're going to use with Aya's parasite skills, and it's not just a case of finding the right opening to shoot in that regard. You might have to find the right time to charge up your super move, your liberate, or your haste, or your heal. It's remarkable in that regard that it's functional and not a stress. I mean, once you get over the initial hurdle of learning how to play, anyway.
There's I find with a lot of turn-based games in general, you're usually handling, parties of characters that all have their own functions, that you have access to all these things and you can do them. Or as you say, with Aya, you're just playing as her, so you need to measure out what is the best strategy here. Do you need to attack now? Do you need to heal? Is it best to fall back and use haste and then come back in? Or, so that juggle's really, really cool. I agree, all around super engaging stuff, absolutely.
I think the odd thing for an RPG, though, is like her parasite skills. It's not like in Parasite Eve 2, spoilers for Parasite Eve 2, her moves are measured by MP, whereas in this, her energy has to build up naturally in the battle, and it doesn't reset after a fight. So you can't even say you really badly want to use like your haste skill or you need to heal, but you have no parasite energy. You may actually have to invest time just dodging before you could even engage in those skills, which are a signature part of the game.
Well, you did have stuff you could do to increase your parasite energy generation.
Yeah.
If we're talking other game mechanics in that regard, you had your bonus points that you could get. Which again
on your armor, the PE stat. But that wouldn't affect like if say you've been in a big fight and you've used it all and you finish the fight, you would then start the next fight with none.
Yeah. But where you were at when you ended the last one, So I ran into that one quite a bit.
yeah, she did. But that's part of the juggle that I find. Because then it makes, because it's only Aya and you've got PE to spend on whatever you want to use to attack or to heal or to whatever, it also makes items more valuable. I find with a lot of role-playing games, I'm one of those people that just winds up with stacks of potions in the game that I just never use, and I will just sort of rely on magic and stuff and that kind of thing. Whereas this, for me, largely, in terms of these elements that we've spoken about at least, I thought the balance was really good to keep me thinking, to keep me engaged in different ways, to try different approaches, or at least consider the fact that multiple things were viable. I don't necessarily think that's true of all things across the board. I would say that what's interesting is the game has loads of weapons, but they all, and I think the point is there's so many because they're like slight different variations. They're slightly better machine gun, slightly better machine gun, slightly better machine gun. There's loads of them. The only thing is they all kind of feel samey. That's the only problem. Yeah. Usually it's like find one you like and then kind of stay there and then feed it other guns to make it better, which is fine. But I would have found it more interesting to play with like the idea of shotguns and grenade launchers a bit more if they all felt just a little bit more different and they all had a little bit more utility to them. Whereas I was just like, you know what, this is my gun. There's many like it, but this is the one that I'm going to use all the time. Berger, how do you feel about the weapon system?
I thought it was fine.
Yeah.
It's very much like you said. You find a weapon that you like, and then you just feed other guns into it. Mm-hmm. I believe when I played it, I had a couple. I had the TMP that you ended up picking up and using for a bulk of the game, which was good because of its volume, right?
Yeah.
And I remember applying a specific element to it, and then I had a second gun that had a different element on it.
Yeah, that's fair. That makes sense.
That was like a shotgun. And then the club which you equipped when you wanted to do magic, when you wanted to be a New York wizard. A blood wizard.
Yeah, blood wizard.
It's crazy how, if you look into the weeds of it, how in-depth the weapon modification system is, but it doesn't feel like it's explained all that thoroughly. Like, you can take a handgun and then take the burst fire of a shotgun and slap it on, so you can now hit multiple targets in a spread. You can then take the acid damage of a grenade launcher and again add that to a handgun, all the while like plus one-ing all of your damage, and eventually you can have something that outpaces the entire game if you just invest that heavily in one weapon.
Yeah.
It's surprising. The only other game I can think of which is like gun focused that does that is like something like Resonance of Fate. But even then, that's like putting 42 scopes and 52 magazines on a handgun as opposed to just cannibalizing it for parts. I'm not sure how you take a Beretta and add a shotgun blast to it, Aya, but good on you.
Yeah, she's very skilled.
You just saw off the end.
Yeah, weapon mechanic.
I guess so. There was some weird things about it as well, and I largely agree. Like, this is the big falling point for the gameplay for me, is how it doesn't feel particularly user-friendly in terms of the way that it explains its systems. Which is interesting because the Square game that comes after this is Final Fantasy VIII, which to me, I just remember there being like long tutorials on how to use the junction system and stuff. So that's interesting. But yeah, I just don't feel like it was very well explained at all. So like, if I remember, as you just said there, feeding it parts and stuff, I'm going to give this kind of burst fire and stuff. And there was like, I want to fire this many shots as part of an attack, but what you're actually doing there is reducing the overall power of every shot. You just got more of them. Which I suppose is absolutely a way to go for like crowd control when you've got multiple enemies and you can pick, when it's your turn and you choose to attack, you're like, oh, I've got like 6 shots. I can pick every one of these enemies and take 2 shots each or whatever, which is cool. But like, it's much of the same, half of a dozen, 6 of another to me when it comes to that kind of stuff. But in terms of like, using the weapon tools and stuff like that felt kind of obtuse and very confusing, and almost like there were parts where I had to do it and I was booting the game up, like, because I was playing it for a few hours every weekend or whatever. I was like, I don't want to do this because I've forgotten again like what way I'm into, what direction to look at this.
Weapons go.
Yeah, how to make weapons
resource.
go.
Like,
I will say I'm wondering, given Japanese developers like penchant for iterating on systems. I wonder if part of the reason that the tutorial systems in Final Fantasy VIII and also by extension Final Fantasy IX for that matter were as robust as they were as a direct result of how un-user friendly this was. Because
makes you wonder, yeah, for sure.
Remembering, I think you were on your second stream or maybe even the third one before Steve and I were like, well, why aren't you spending your BP?
Yeah. Didn't even know that was a thing. Game never told me that was a thing, and if it did a very bad job of telling me it was a thing.
And that's just an entire extra system on top of all the other systems, isn't it? You've leveled up. Here you can mess around with some stats for free. Thanks for not telling us, game. That's helpful. I think there is a tutorial panel on the main menu, which you can easily skip, and then you are just completely smegged. Like, at least in Final Fantasy VII, you had like a whole tutorial room in like Sector 7 or whatever.
Yeah,
where you had people
that's true.
go, if you put this materia clad, look, lightning, oof. A little bit easier.
That's also the standard in a lot of Final Fantasy games, because I'm pretty sure there's a similar room like that in Final Fantasy VI and Narsh.
Fair play. Haven't played 6. I'll take your
word
for it.
Yeah, I think so. To be fair, though, the BP thing, the bonus points, where you can like, I'm going to make my turn come around quicker, or you can just spend it on a gun as well, or increase your inventory room. I think that's really cool. That's one of those examples. And this is just kind of by circumstance that it doesn't tell you. But it means that when you discover it, the game is actually deeper than it first seems. And it's with the BP, I don't think it's necessarily important to take advantage of that. It makes the game certainly easier. And probably, if you're playing New Game Plus and stuff, you probably do want that. But on your first playthrough, you probably could miss something like that and just kind of get on fine. It's there if you want to dig into it, but I don't think with a lot of these things, at the very least, while my criticisms are that it's not very well explained, there is a lot of potential for you to just kind of fool around and figure it out and figure out what works for you, I guess. So if I'm looking at it in a positive light, there is absolutely room to get things wrong and then go, oh, okay, I'm going to do this next time, and now I have a super gun.
I mean, that's true, because I mean, it gives the player a lot of choice. There's like a lot of stats you can affect, and I suppose it's not like immersive sim level, but you can definitely tailor your Aya how you want with it. At least, you can give her a load of item space, you can make her move faster, you can make a gun that just rail guns things instantly or whatever. really good in that regard.
With the rate that they give you new weapons, if you kind of feel like you've messed up your weapon, it's very easy to start again on a new one. Like, oh, I'm just going to feed this bad one to this one, and I'll just take the things that I do want and things that I don't want can go in the bin, and we start again. Like, that's really cool as a concept for sure. Berger, any more thoughts on gameplay in general?
Thinking through it, I do think that the navigation, navigating through the world, and again, this is mostly recent because I watched you play the game. But navigating through the game is kind of a nightmare sometimes. Sometimes exits aren't clear. Something I learned really recently through your playthrough, I think you're the one who told me, was that this game runs in the same engine as Final Fantasy VII, which makes sense if you look at it.
Right, yeah.
And one of the things I think is lacking that was in 7 and wasn't in this one was in 7 you could bring up hit the select button and it brought up little arrows. It showed you where your character was. The zones were bigger, but it at least put a little arrow on the area where you would go to leave the area.
Yes.
And I think adding that back to this one would really improve the general playability of it. Outside of that, though, the game slaps. Like, still, like, I know I've spent a bit of time complaining about it. But,
totally.
It still slaps. It's still good.
For sure.
I mean, if we're talking gameplay bugbears, can I just
go
just
for it,
throw
Steve?
one out there?
Yeah, I think I know what you're about to say. Yeah.
Only one major one for Steve, and it's the interactables are too finicky. Like, we're talking if you could like interact with an entire shelf in Resident Evil, Aya needs to find the exact small 1 pixel line, like it's a broken sword or something, to interact with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can just stop gameplay dead. I mean, I know I need to check the shelf. I keep looking at the shelf. And I'm not doing anything. And then you just find that one magic pixel, and then she opens that drawer or whatever and finds a key.
Yes.
It's the only game I know of this like fixed camera angle perspective where they've made it so precise to its detriment that it actually is a point of frustration. To the point where I'm mentioning it on a podcast, God knows how many years after its release, it's that bad.
No, I agree. When you say that, and you might even be referring to the same room that comes to mind for me. There's a room when you get to the Central Park area of the game where you need to find a key, and I'm sure many people did the same thing I did, where I did a big loop of Central Park being like, I don't know where I'm going next. Oh, it was in this room right at the beginning all along. I didn't move something out of the way because I interacted with it, from the wrong corner. You're right, you need to go around the other bit. So yes, finicky is absolutely the word. I agree with both of what you guys have said, really.
It just happens all the time. Like the final sequence of the game, if you don't interact with that 1 pixel and use the console, the final thing will insta-jib you.
Yeah. Just what happened to me. The other thing, and Berger, to your point, with the navigation and stuff, particularly the museum near the end of the game is kind of maddening. In terms of what you said about too many random battles, that might have been where it started to bog down, certainly, but that is also because I kept getting a little bit lost. Like, it was very not clear and kind of a slog, that last little dungeon, if you want to call it that. But otherwise, it wasn't too bad for me. But yeah, both of you guys are absolutely, I can see your point of view. Okay, cool. If we're done with gameplay, let's move into story. So as a slight setup, I'll at least give. The story starts with Aya Brea, who's a New York Police Department rookie, attending a opera night when everyone suddenly combusts, which is quite a dramatic way to start a game. With the exception of Aya and the singer on stage, Melissa Pierce, there's a bit of a showdown between the two, and there's a discovery that Melissa has gone through some stuff, and oh no, now she's a monster, is basically the extremely short version. And then we kind of roll from there. The story is probably the most interesting thing to talk about, I guess, because it is... You said, Steve, you wouldn't necessarily call it hard sci-fi, and I don't think I go that far either, but it is... It loves its scientific, there's like whole
word
scenes.
dumping.
You get a full lecture on what a mitochondria is and does.
Probably more than once either. Because I love some pseudoscience, obviously. Hello, Ghostbusters fan. But this, I find what they do a little bit honourable, but it loses me a few times. So, Steve, I'm going to pass to you. If you want to talk about the story first, maybe explain it in a bit more detail. But there were points where I just thought it went a bit too far. And I've read the plot of the game back before in preparation for this, and I do understand it, but at the time it was just like there's so much at times where I was just like, I don't know what's going on anymore.
I mean, how far into the weeds do you want me to go? Right, so the basic thrust of the story is that Melissa Pierce's body has been taken over by cells in her liver and then overridden her entire body to then want to birth a new stage of evolution and basically usurp the human race. Aya's body has similar cells which are now basically opposed to and are helping her assist in stopping her. Although she doesn't quite realise the ins and outs of the cellular level herself. She's just like, I'm going to just keep hunting her down. I can walk through these impossible fire barriers and shoot monsters. What's happening to me? And, I've got a Super Saiyan form now. Neat. Not quite that, but yeah. All the while, Eve's like melting people and trying to get herself impregnated with evil sperm that's got no cells in it to muck with her own plans, because that's part of what happened in the novel. Because she's like not the same villain, but knows of the original villain's intent and wants to do her own version of the plan.
Right. Okay.
There's also like to go even further into the weeds. There's an EX game mode which basically references that entire sequence in its own way of the novel and the film. Right. With that secret final boss. But yeah, it basically boils down to cells in one person want to destroy the world, and cells in another person are thinking that's a bit wrong, mate. There's also an evil scientist named Hans Clamp with the most subtle villain name ever. And some really cute side characters like Daniel Dollis and Kunihiko Maeda, who references the first novel and whatnot, or at least he's not a member of that cast, but he is someone who knows what happened.
Right, yeah. That's fair. I mean, you've definitely touched the important points there, and there are loads of things that I want to dig in specifically. I did also, on top of reading the synopsis for the game before we recorded this to remind myself, I did go and read the synopsis for the book and the film, just so I had the full context. And it is, as a story, I really like the idea, certainly. But when it came to the game, while I felt like I was like, I've got the general gist of what's going on, I did feel like it was a bit needlessly complex at times. Like there are parts of it you probably could have cut around and made it a little bit less obtuse.
I think it's a lot of asking of Squaresoft at the time.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
Yeah, I mean,
if it was a longer game, I guess, when you think of Squaresoft and big RPGs, it might work so much. Maybe they just tried to squeeze too much into its runtime.
When you boil it down to being, the thrust of it is one child's liver and eye went in two different people and they're having an argument. It's a little bit easier than all the other stuff.
Yeah, but then you get all the background to that, like the connection to the Japanese case, which is important, but you probably could have just put it in basics, and then the people who read the book go, oh, I get what he's referencing. Like all that chat about that, which now makes sense to me because I've gone back and read what the novel was about. But at the time I was like, this is a lot of juxtaposition. And also there's the whole thing with Aya and her sister, and I was like, that's quite a lot, and also doesn't complete until you play the full game, but that's a whole other point. Berger, how do you feel about the story?
I think it makes about as much sense as Resident Evil 2.
Maybe it does, but I don't know. It's the way that it's told. I don't know.
No, I just have to talk about how much I hate Resident Evil 2.
Yeah.
Heel moment.
Yeah, have that heel moment.
I'm kidding, obviously. I will say I definitely didn't get it as a kid.
I'm not surprised. I would have been exactly the same.
I didn't get it as a 36-year-old human playing through it with somebody else.
Yeah.
A lot of the time. I'm sitting here thinking about what might have been the design process, or like why they felt the need to include all of this. Thinking maybe there's an understanding that when you're developing towards a target audience, in this case, people who have read the book and played the game, being a Japanese developers developing games for Japanese people.
Sure.
There's like a level of inherent knowledge where a Japanese person be like, oh, I remember that from the book, and they're excited. When you port a game over to international release that didn't have access to the book or the movie at the time, it's a lot. And then I could see the benefit to including it because you need the word dump in order for the people to understand what's happening in the moment of at least why the pseudoscience is working the way it is. ultimately speaking, I'll agree with you. The whole back plot with her sister and the child and the because at the time you don't know it's her. You don't know she's flashing back.
Mm.
And it's not, and because isn't there a moment where she actually sees her past self in the present as well?
Yeah, in the hospital.
That's confusing. I'm wondering how much of this might have been fixed with voice acting. Like if there was intonation happening, and because they do a good job of forwarding the action with music. Excuse me. But when the text comes up, it's silent. I wanna talk about another just side mention, a game series that I know all three of us have played, but the Yakuza series, when your exposition dumps are happening, the text crawl has a sound, and it changes in like tone depending on which of the character on the screen is talking at the time.
Right.
And I think something like that, just to ground you as the text is passing by, would have helped a lot. Just as a different click or something when you click the button to indicate like passing of text, because you're reading a lot of text. It's just appearing on the bottom quarter of the screen the whole time. And the only way that you know somebody else is talking is by their name that pops up the first time.
Right.
Like it's just a script that's loaded in, and they're just reading, like it's just loading the script that was added, and not really. Stuff like that I think could have helped, but understanding that this was 1999 when this game was put together, I get that it's not completely serviceable. I liked the thing a lot. No stranger to anybody on this podcast. And the body horror elements and how they were implemented. The scene in Central Park where people go into a mass. The whole giant Ghostbusters reference where that mass comes out of the sewer is all wonderful. It is. I've made no secret of the fact that I like Resident Evil 3 because it's like a big dumb action movie, and this is also like a big dumb action movie with horror elements. It's definitely my jam. This is a game where I wouldn't mind seeing a remake of.
Yeah, that's definitely a point I want to get to closer to the end for sure. But you know what? Like I've got loads of things to nitpick with the story. But as it goes, the actual events that you get to play out and stuff are absolutely interesting and really well put together and just fun. Like as you say, from an action perspective and the gameplay and stuff, it's really cool. It keeps moving along. When it isn't going reading you a script, as you quite rightfully said, dumping a script on screen for you to read, it moves along at a good pace. Otherwise, outside of that, my only issue is that the stuff with Aya and her sister doesn't resolve until you play the game through a second time, or whatever you have to do, load the save back up to get it. Which is, I guess, I don't mind incentive to play New Game Plus, especially in the 90s where you didn't have too many video games. Usually, like people weren't buying games on discount all the time. It was like, I'm going to buy this game and this is going to last me. But to leave the story sort of feeling unfinished without it, you need to play New Game Plus for it all to make sense. I'm not massively keen on that, but otherwise, whatever. I'm fine. The only thing that other than nitpick is that all the science stuff's really good, but the massive plot hole of the fact that Melissa burns a building full of people alive and then goes missing. And then the next day she's due to have a show on Christmas Day and they don't cancel it, and she turns up and just blobs a bunch of people. And surely Melissa Pierce, she's suddenly gone missing after loads of people set fire. They cancel that event on Christmas Day in Central Park. Nope, they let it go ahead. And so the story continues. That's a little bit nonsensical, but sure, whatever. Steve, you said the characters. The characters are great.
Yeah.
Aya's really, really cool. Especially, she reminds me of she's both Jill Valentine kind of kick-ass, but also, to keep it really, specific to Square, she really reminds me of Terra from Final Fantasy VI, because she has this constant questioning of, why is this happening to me? Which makes you feel for her. But she doesn't become whiny about it or anything. She kind of just gets on with the job and stuff. But it does make you feel a bit sorry for her. Like, she's just a person living out her life, and then suddenly she's in the middle of this, supernatural nightmare. But yeah, Steve, go ahead. You mentioned characters, so feel free to dig in a little more.
I think that's some of the best parts for it, really.
Yeah.
You see a buddy cop dynamic like Aya and Daniel, and you expect them to be really, really ornery one another. One's the seasoned veteran, one's the rookie detective, but they just get on like a house on fire, and they're clearly implied to be very good buddies throughout of it. The first time we're introduced to her partner is literally him pointing out a reporter who's harassing her just after a big boss fight, which is just a hell of an introduction. Barry and his Magnum shooting a zombie, nah. Daniel Dollis haymaker all the way. And then you have Maeda, who, Japanese scientists come to see what's going on, try and solve the issue and help out. First thing he does is encounter some racist cops who get themselves set on fire, just panically runs. It's mostly implied off screen, but he also saves Aya after she's been through Aya after a massive boss fight crash with a carriage, and then calls Daniel for backup. Again, pretty awesome. We have the police chief who's can we not get all this news out straight away and cause a panic, and Aya flubs it and pretty much lets the entire story slip, causing a massive evacuation of Manhattan. Doesn't do the give me your gun, give me your badge. He's actually oh, okay, let's figure this out then. More interesting characters than the usual stereotypes. Aya herself, I feel, is more expressive in the sequel, but in this one she's like Sai says, Jill Valentine, but with a bit more of a wanting to figure out why is this happening to me, but still rising to the occasion. Eve, surprisingly intimidating for me. Whenever she's around, something awful's about to go down, and she is very sure of herself. Even her very last moment eye to eye with Aya is still terrifying as she's dying, which is giving you a smug death glare, she already knows she's quote unquote won. It's much more different than just the world will burn in an inferno of hate. It's actual villain motivation. They know what they're doing. It's cool.
Yeah, she has a lot of villains will fade into the background and find about their plot later. But as a villain, I feel like she's very central. She has a lot of agency, obviously, because she is driving the story forward. But you get to kind of be a part of that every time because you keep encountering her multiple times throughout the story, which ties the two characters together even further, as you said, because they're kind of at war with each other, a sort of opposite end of the spectrum sort of situation. You're very right about other characters not overly being tropey. I mean, Daniel Dollis maybe a little bit being the sort of Black Hop Family Man thing, feels like it's been done a few times before, but it's still endearing enough. And what actually happens to him throughout the course of the game and his son and stuff is unique and interesting and engaging. And Maeda's a weird one because it feels like he has the potential to fall into be kind of an annoying character potentially, but he's not. Even though he gives you a bunch of just duff items that don't do anything, that take up your inventory, which is kind of stupid and annoying, you kind of love him anyway because of all the things you just said, Steve. He's an active participant. He actually he's the connection to all the rest of it that explains to the characters and the player a little bit about more what's going on, and then engages with it. He doesn't sink into the background as the tech nerd that they have to go and see. He's kind of out and about and part of it and shows up and does stuff.
I say I do love the almost Chekhov's gun of he keeps giving you basically origami figures which are completely useless and just take up your inventory. And then he's trying to give you a pivotal, crucial save the game information and a weapon at the end, and he's basically, nah guys, he keeps getting a jump, get on with it. Just let's keep moving to the detriment, and it's a great payoff.
Yeah, no, totally.
The good scientist versus the cliche one.
He gives you a gun that's absolutely shit. He uses it against the last boss too.
That's it. He should have given you the ammo at the same time, but it's fine. We got there in the end. No, totally. I love stuff like that where that ties together the story and the gameplay as well, because you've actually been given these items that you have to go put in a box in the in the police department, in the precinct. You're like, get out of here, and then by the end, you can't really help but laugh when everyone's like, no, you shouldn't give her more junk, and it turns out to be the thing that turns that terrible gun into something worthwhile. Berger, any more thoughts on characters?
Y'all said it already. I like the characters in this game a lot. I like it a lot now, even more playing it as an adult.
Yeah.
Because again, I understand. I have perspective on life that I didn't have as a kid, 12, 13-year-old tiny human. I think for the time, if we think back to, again, this game was not released at a time when video game depth and stories was still emerging as a storytelling medium, at least for these adult themes. I think the fact that Daniel had his son and his marriage had fallen apart, I think that's actually quite interesting. Like, I understand that in the context of media, it's an old trope that we've dealt with a lot. I think there's a lot of Murdoch from Lethal Weapon in Daniel's.
Yeah, obviously, that's.
Murdoch is Danny Glover, right?
Yeah,
I don't want to get them mixed up. That'd be really embarrassing.
Oh, jeez, I don't know, but yeah.
Yes,
Danny
he
Glover's
is.
character in Lethal Weapon. There you go.
Yeah, there it is. Danny Glover's character from Lethal Weapon. And in addition to that, like Steve mentioned earlier, I think it's really fascinating that the cops are all competent. And even some of the side characters, like, it's not go talk to the officer in the kennel. It's like go talk to, what was her name, Karen. Right. Whatever. Go talk to this specific person who does weapons.
Warren,
this specific person.
Yeah.
And they each have their own thing.
There's even a little story with some of the little cops as well, because some of them get taken out along the way and somebody has to kind of step up into that role, which is really unique as far as NPCs go.
Which is a lot to have happen in a video game for the time. So I want to give that credit where it's due. Yes, they're cliche tropes. I don't think that it really happened a lot in video games. Aya, I will say I like Aya a lot. She does her best to keep it together. Very clearly a victim of trauma, and is just trying to make it through the end of the week in this case. I enjoyed my 8 a lot as well. He's genuine and earnest. He genuinely just wants to help fix the problem. Hans Klump is a cartoon character, which I think is the point.
Oh, Professor Hojo's intern.
Professor Hojo's intern. I want to go ahead and throw a shout out to the voice actor who did his performance in the in the First Days Play live plays for that. I think they did an excellent job. Thinking about Eve, I think her digression from the beginning of the game to the mid of the game to the end of the game, of where you see Melissa finally stop being Melissa, and stop poking out, is interesting. That happens after Central Park when she gains her super big crazy form. And then, what else can be said? I think the cops are competent. That's one of my favorite things to see in a video game. It's one of the reasons I like Control, is the NPCs are all just doing their jobs, and that's articulated well in this game. Like, the cops lock down New York. They're trying to do their best to keep order. They maintain the evacuation. They're professionals, and I think that shows as well.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about the way the game looks. As we said, it's a 25-year-old game now, so obviously you've got to talk about it in the harsh light of day, but also the context at the time, however we want to approach it individually, for sure. The beginning of the show, I may mention specifically that the game takes place in New York City. It was originally actually designed to take place in Tokyo. Obviously, the book is set in Japan as a Japanese piece of media, but they decided to take the sequel and drop it in New York after the first 6 months or so of development. And I do have to wonder if this was reusing some of the original ideas from Final Fantasy VII, perhaps, because also that is a game that was originally set somehow in New York City before they devised Midgar, which is really interesting to me. But obviously, this game, if you've played Final Fantasy VII, and I found Final Fantasy VIII even more so, you will get lots of nostalgic feels in this game, because as it's using that engine and using that art style, very much reminds me of that era, which I absolutely liked, because as much as I try not to be a victim to the pull of nostalgia, I do love that era of Final Fantasy, absolutely. I think it says a lot about the directing of the cutscenes and stuff like that, and the otherwise sort of grounded parts of the game, really, like the locations and stuff, feeling very real and being based on real locations, and for the most part actually kind of looking like what they're supposed to, or at least what you would imagine they look like. But the nuts cutscenes that happen in this game still hit hard. Like, everything's grounded enough that when people melt into an orange blob, it's really disgusting, even for a 25-year-old game with PS1 graphics. And the fact that, that opening cutscene where everyone burns and the opera music playing is actually genuinely unsettling. So well done. Or even after all this time, you're like, yeah, I'm uncomfortable already. So good job, Square, on that. Like, largely, I got no complaints really, considering where it was at the time. And I think, you have to take everything with the full context of where it was when you look back on it. It's aged no worse than any game from that era. It's certainly aged a lot better than many of them, in fact. Steve, how do you feel about the visuals for Parasite Eve?
I'm pretty much on the same page, I think. I especially love how, like, in the game, that not necessarily how Aya animates, but the monsters are fantastic, especially for, like, 1997, 1998. In a playable moving space that's not a turn-based battlefield, like where they're all stood in a line, especially.
Yeah.
That stuff's great. Like, I could see you could take those kind of animations and movements, maybe speed them up a little, and they'd work in a modern action game. That level of, like, fluidity to them. She's a bit tanky. Like, she moves like a Resident Evil character fundamentally does, except when she transforms into a final super move, or she does like a Dragon Ball Z pose when she heals herself. Nothing too untoward. The CGI though, like the actual look and aesthetic of it, I think is fantastic. Even now, I like. Everything looks. It's not quite super mega Pixar level or anything, but it all works. Is all believable, and like when they do the body horror transformation or even the inner cell stuff, it's all engaging and grotesque and detailed enough that, like, for example, when you see a beloved police dog transform into a three-headed abomination, you're like wincing. When you see a fighter jet pilot liquidate inside of his jet, and the jet then crashes and explodes into his partner, it's like incredible stuff. Like, that's way more cool than, trying to drain that one thing in Remake that still looks like an FMV cam gone wrong. The one where you have to get the crank and spin it.
Totally. Those scenes really do stick out. I don't know how exactly and why they pulled it, or rather, I guess, how they pulled it off. But it does. It still hits. Something timeless about it, almost, in the same way that, and obviously the dog thing that you just referenced is a big old The Thing reference. But, you go back and watch that 40-year-old film, and there's a lot of it that still hits home. It's a similar thing, and I don't know how they pulled it off, but it still looks great.
Yeah, it's Square's like punching at least at Final Fantasy 7 to 8 grade. I would say 8 probably beats it, but it looks that level of detail.
Yeah, for sure. It's considering that it's developed between the two of them, it actually does perfectly represent kind of a midpoint. Because you're right, I don't think it's as good looking as 8's cutscenes, certainly in FMVs. Those were incredible and still are. But yeah, it's a big jump from Final Fantasy 7 for me. Burger, how do you feel about the way the game looks?
I love it. Talking about when this game came out and what other games came out around this time, it's a vast visual improvement over Final Fantasy 7.
Yeah.
And I think the comparison as like a stepping stone between 7 and 8 is valid, 100%. The game still looks good. I remember the scene that sticks out to me isn't the dog one that everybody talks about. It's the rat one.
Yeah.
And that one, geez, it's so cool that, like, even again, almost 25 years later, it's when you still get the.
I was playing it.
Willies.
James, I put this clip out on social media because just of how impactful it is. That me and James were sitting in the stream while I was playing it. We both were like, "Oh god!" when it happened, and it's a 25-year-old cutscene, but it still got us like, "Oh, it's icky."
Like y'all said, there's cutscenes of this one of fighter jets going through the streets of New York, which is awesome. The explosions are great. Seeing the giant thing come out around the Statue of Liberty, seeing the Statue of Liberty crying ooze is fun. The monster design in this game, I think, is top notch because you could see where they're all kind of at least grounded in the spaces that you find them. Like when you're in the sewer, you find frogs and bats, lizard things, weird cat things. Just kind of like seeing where Eve could have reached out into whatever detritus of existence is around and infect the latent mitochondria inside of stuff to cause it to mutate and to, if not serve her aims directly, at the very least shield her actions from direct reprisal. Um, I will say that like seeing it now, giving it the context of stuff, you do see that sometimes the larger enemies kind of just like float about. Like you could see like as the game like processes their movement, the actual engine doesn't like spin them fast enough, or their wings don't flap fast enough for the flying units. And they kind of just do look like they're kind of just floating around on the surface, just repositioning. But I'm not mad about it. I think this was a fantastic example of what the PlayStation can do. And it just goes thinking about this game, and you go into Final Fantasy VIII, which I will agree the cinematics in that one are markedly better, and how the backgrounds and stuff integrate into the game. Again, you can see the continued progression because Final Fantasy VIII looks very similar to Parasite Eve, just visually in terms of character size, and also the pre-rendered backgrounds that they ran through were similar in design. I think I wouldn't be surprised if this was in fact, like you said, like a big stepping stone between 7 and 8 as like a let's try this more this less cutesy, less anime art style and try to grind in some more realism.
For sure.
I'm actually really like in tune with the art style of this, the human characters. I love Aya's aesthetic in this because it's like not human enough, but also not anime enough, and that bridge between. Like I'd love a game in that art style that's in the CG. Obviously, these days people have been more affinitive for probably a straight up anime style or a more realistic style, but it's got its own unique like vibe, and I really gelled with it, especially in my most recent playthrough.
Actually, I agree.
And I think it's testament to Eve's power that she can go into the Natural History Museum and look at the T-Rex and think, I'll wait on that one. I'll wait until like Aya's actually in the foyer first, because all the things she's reanimated in that place. She leaves the T-Rex for a bit, just to spook you later.
Is Aya the first character to wear the generic female protagonist outfit?
Is she wearing a generic?
Hey. Okay.
I mean, listen. We're not using this as a derogatory term here. We're just calling it what it is. It's a jacket with a shirt underneath, pants and boots.
Yeah, but this jacket isn't like form-fitting tight. It's kind of baggy, like a bomber jacket. It looks neat.
Yeah.
I like the big bulky baggy jacket. That looks cool.
I'm not calling it out. Like I love. We're talking about how much we love the character design here. But I'm just wondering if she's the originator of the generic female protagonist outfit.
To be fair, no, Steve, to your point, I hadn't thought about it, but you're so right. It's like it's really kind of in the line between realistic, like the characters are largely realistically proportioned, but also they do sort of have an anime flavor to them. They don't have, we're just going to continually compare this game to the two Final Fantasy games around it, but they don't look like quite as realistic as Final Fantasy VIII's characters' faces, in that they're very square and angular and whatever. In this, they're a bit softer, a bit rounder. The eyes are a bit bigger, sort of anime styled. It's really cool. I'd love to see, and we're going to talk about remake, I'm sure, but I'd love to see that represented again instead of making it completely realism, because that is something distinct about it compared to those other games around it. The other thing that I just want to quickly shout out in terms of the visuals, and it's really, really simple. I just like the UI. I think it's really nice. Yeah. I mean, the game poorly explains how to use it sometimes, or parts of it, but it's really nice and simple. I love the transparency of it, transparent grey. The font's really nice. Just looks good. Like when I think of the piece of music Out of Phase that plays in the Precinct, I think about that UI, and vice versa. When I think about that transparent sort of boxy system, that music starts playing in my head. So yeah, it really meshes well with everything.
It's very unobtrusive.
Yeah, exactly. It suits its purpose. It's nice enough to look at, but it's not distracting in any way. Let's talk about the music then. Let's talk about the audio, which is
short topic.
Let's put this one last. I don't even know what to say about this. Let's put this one last. Just to give this I read through some of the Wikipedia for this game just to pick up the the obvious information about the review scores and stuff. And it has an entire thing about the music, it's about 6 paragraphs about the music design. So that should really go to show the sort of reception this music had, that people dig into its history and that kind of stuff, and the fact that they got a remix album and all this. It's pretty. I mean, and as well, fact, Steve, that you were like, we need to talk about the soundtrack for now. That's what I call survival horror. So clearly, it landed with you. I know you talked about it at length, so I guess I'll go to you first, just to quickly, how do you feel about the music?
Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? I've got no complaints. I feel like it has its own vibe and tone. Maybe not the greatest for out and out horror in terms of like scary soundtracks from games we've played, but as a feel and a vibe of that through line between Resident Evil and Final Fantasy that Parasite Eve walks, it's fantastic. And I believe the lady who made the music also did like Street Fighter 2 or other things. She left Capcom for Square, and it's like one of her first jobs, or I think Chrono Trigger and then this.
I believe so, yeah.
And it's
Super Mario RPG.
Yeah, it's got the right kind of things. I mean, it's got safe room style stuff. It's got atmospheric overtones, so when you get exploring through various places. Perhaps some that are a little bit too soul destroying for me when I was grinding junk in Central Park. Personal issues aside, but like the main eye catch theme, the battle theme, and the boss themes are all fantastic, and they all have like their own leitmotif, and it's it's very strong and resonant, and it's the fact that a lot of this stuff actually carries over into both its sequel and its weird non-canon thing that we don't speak about. It says a lot, really.
Oh, awesome! That's good to know. Yeah, she's done a couple of RPGs before this. Berger, as you said, Super Mario RPG. She also did Live Alive. But this is very different because it's not a fantasy game, really. I mean, it's got fantastical elements, it's got supernatural to it, or whatever, pseudoscience, but it's set in the modern day at the time in New York City. So it needs to have, not a bunch of fantastical pieces of music. It needs to be a bit more grounded, it needs to be a bit more sciencey. You're right, absolutely got its own tone. I'm really excited to hear that a lot of the themes carry over into the sequel. That's really cool. Because what I love doing our episode of now, like, there was music that really stayed with me since that, and I would like routinely put certain tracks on it again. And now there's stuff that didn't land with me, I like a lot more now that I've got the full context for it, like in my own experience. I think it's just the soundtrack that it's somehow very lush and also absolutely nuts at once. I probably described a lot of it this way when we were talking about it before, that it feels like at many points it's about to fall apart. It's just like, it's so crazy at times, but it also just has a really good idea of what it is and what it isn't, and it fits within the borders of its own sound, and thus it defines itself it defines itself really, really well. What more could you want out of a soundtrack? It does have a couple of few spooky pieces. Surface of the Water is terrifying. I know we talked about that on the Now episode as well. It's one of the scariest pieces of music in a video game as far as I'm concerned. But some of the chill stuff is just wonderful. I listened to Out of Phase and
lo-fi beats to shoot monsters to.
Yeah, that's just put that 1 hour loop, please, and just go about my day. I love it. Berger, how do you feel about the soundtrack? I feel like we're going to be across the board pretty positive.
I mean, I really enjoyed the soundtrack to this game. I remembered liking it quite a bit.
Yeah.
I'll admit, when you're a kid, it's not the first thing you pay attention to. But
it's more of a subconscious thing, right?
Right. Watching you play through it, gosh, the music is so good. Not just the music, too, the sound effects that are present in terms of, I'm going to talk about the sound lighting, effectively. The lighting was great. But no, like, the sound effects were good as well. Your guns sounded good. The monsters, they made sounded good. The, confirmation noises, stuff like that also sounded nice. But talking about the soundtrack, there's just, God, it's its own vibe. It's a whole vibe. I mean, what's it say about? Also taking a look at the Wikipedia page, and what's it say about a soundtrack of yours that it can, looking at it over 10 years later, to get a reprint and a remix, that's awesome. I would say I can't think of another video game soundtrack that I can recall having a professional treatment like that.
Especially, you say, so far removed from the release.
So far, yeah, exactly.
I like how the soundtrack gets a re-release, but not the game, though. Especially in European territory, Square.
I have nothing negative to say about it. I mean, I will say where some of the loops were longer.
Sure.
Especially, but what are you gonna do? There, you have to fit a lot of music onto
Single disc.
a lot of discs.
No, it's two discs, isn't it? But yeah.
It was the same thing in Final Fantasy VII. Had the same problem with the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack. Some of the soundtracks were bangers, but a lot of the songs are very short by design.
Mm-hmm.
Victim of its own time in that regard.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
I mean, yeah, it's hard. I'd like to say more, but it's hard really to find out, what to say. I think it's just incredible. It just holds up. Out of everything in this game that holds up, and I think across the board, largely the game does hold up. Again, that's coming from someone of the opinion that likes, that grew up in that era, so it's very easy for me to get back into that mold a little bit. I think the soundtrack just holds up probably the best out of all of it, really. It helps if you have the context, absolutely, because I liked it before, but I love it now, and I'm just going to keep going back listening to it, I'm sure. If anything, if I ever go back, and I probably will replay Parasite Eve at some point, but one of the things I'll be looking forward to most is hearing all the soundtrack back in context. So, yeah, massive, massive, massive fan of that. Which brings us nicely to our sort of roundabout conclusions. But before we give our sort of actual thoughts, said it a couple of times about remake, the state of a remake of this game, and how badly do we feel this game need a remake, or maybe you feel like perhaps it's best left alone. Burgo, how would you feel about a remake of Parasite Eve? Because it's something that came up a few times while we were playing through it and remarking, what they would keep the same, what they would change, what they'd have to do to it if they were going to do it. How would you feel about it if it was going to happen?
Oh, I think it'd be cool. I would like it to be. I think we talked about this a little bit in the context of that. I wouldn't mind seeing a remake of this game done in the style of the Resident Evil remakes.
Mm-hmm.
I think its execution and its presentation, it's something you think about when these games came out and when they did is what are they trying to evoke here, and how can they evoke that feeling differently with today's technology?
Right.
And I think that and I think we see this in the sequels as well. Like it moves less away from real time as technology keeps up to a point where you can make it moves less away from turn-based as technology keeps up to the point where like making reactive moves is less sluggish. So I think if you keep the RPG elements into it in terms of leveling up and getting your powers, getting your abilities, and I think those are all fine, and you just throw more enemies at the screen and have their behaviors be more modern, I think it'd be a hell of a game to play, especially if you kept it around the same length as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can pad it or subtract some stuff in some ways. But then, like, if you look at it that way, you're looking at an experience not unlike the Resident Evil 4 remake. Now, imagine playing Resident Evil 4 remake with magic powers. That'd be dope. And I think... Do I think that a remake will happen? Likely no. I think if we do see one, it'll be a completely reimagined experience, full of far more technobabble.
Can we have someone other than Nomura write it, please?
No!
Yeah.
Nomura will write it and you'll be happy.
No, I don't know if he will. I agree. Yeah, I feel like, you could put some extra sections in there and probably explain the story a little bit. I think they probably have to be more conscious of that because Steve, or actually Berger, I think it was you that said, it was written for Japanese gamers who had better context of the overall narrative. Whereas this, if they are remaking it, it probably would appeal to completely new fans that have never played it before or have no idea. So you would probably have to explain it a little bit better. Yeah, I'd be interested from a gameplay thing. I would be sort of hesitant to move away from what it does so well with the turn-based and the aiming sphere and stuff like that. But I don't see how you could do that with the way the games move and stuff like these days. But I agree. I don't think it's going to happen. We are now at the point where with game remakes we're getting so many of them, but they're all for the most obvious games, aren't they? And by obvious, I mean the games that don't need them. They're just remaking anything beloved at this point. With RE4 and Dead Space and MGS3 just got announced, which is, I don't know if that game needs a remake. And whereas this, I think it could stand for a remake. You might even kind of set the franchise off down a new path, and it might become a big worldwide thing rather than America and Japan only. Europe, you're not allowed. But I don't see it happening. Yeah, absolutely. But
You don't have mitochondria, Sai.
Yeah, apparently not. No, just no mitochondria for me. Steve, how would you feel about a remake?
Same, really. I would love to see it, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. Yeah, it's gameplay-wise, I can see basically they would have to probably burgle from Parasite Eve 2's like more Resident Evil, but you have magical powers aspect than this, where it's more turn-based. I could see that, but put behind like over the shoulder will probably work really well, and. Obviously, RE4 is quite linear where you're going from place to place to place. In that regard, you probably would make it where I would go from Carnegie Hall to Central Park to the hospital and so on. So it's more linear. I could see that working as an actual third-person action game of lady shoots key blasts against monsters. The story is definitely interesting enough and odd enough that it would get people talking. But you have to understand there's a reason why I refer to the third birthday as non-canon and all these other awful things, because it landmined the entire franchise. It went down a very different route, very different mechanical process, and rewrote the characters to the point where I don't want that version of Aya back. And I think that's the one that Square would run to rather than the version that's here. That's the part that scares me the most. I think that this kind of turn-based horror action RPG game has a place that has sadly been lost to time. But then again, just this week, to date the recording just a little bit, they did announce the update for the Alone in the Dark remake, and that started to look more and more good with each passing minute. So old gems from way back may still be able to find new ground. I just don't know how I just don't know how you do 1997 era New York any justice now, considering we're that far removed. And there's certain things about that probably wouldn't gel well with a modern audience.
No, that's fair. But also,
Interesting.
as you say, in terms of like what would land well, we talked about all these crazy cutscenes that still hit today. Seeing them all, remade and crazy good visuals, like everyone melting in Central Park would be massive, wouldn't it? People would lose their mind for that. So
the one thing I wouldn't want is to just see the house Final Fantasy 14 to present style version of it. Like that art style in New York with characters melting doesn't mesh as well for me.
Yeah, I think with a lot of the case where, some remakes do really well with it when they don't have the original team involved, but, the people that made Parasite Eve probably don't work at Square. Like, the names I just listed in terms of the producer and director and stuff, I don't think they work at Square anymore. And Nomura is way more of a writer than a designer now, which is unfortunate for everyone involved. It's tough to say that it would be the same thing. That's the only problem.
So the third birthday, right? Just to get it out there, it's the other M of Parasite Eve games.
After this, I'm going to read. Yeah, I've heard awful things. Okay, so let's talk about the original game. Just one last bit. What's our final conclusion? What are our final thoughts on the original Parasite Eve? Where do we land? We've all been pretty over. Other than the fact we point out a bunch of stuff that could have been done slightly better, I think overall we've been very, very positive about this game. So, Berger, how do you feel about Parasite Eve overall?
I think it's great. I'm trying, reflecting on the game as I did preparing for the podcast this morning, and watching you play it again, getting ready for doing this. I'm wondering, as much as I love the thing, and there's no secret that I love the thing, I'm wondering if this was the thing I saw first, then what drew me to that particular film. I don't remember which came first in that instance. I'm pretty sure I didn't watch the thing until much later in my life, but I loved it. I liked the body horror aspects of it. I liked the presentation, the style. I like the strong, female protagonist. I've never once hidden that I like a strong female protagonist who isn't a plot device. We mentioned Jill Valentine a lot, but I see a lot of Jesse Faden here. Like, in terms of a character who comes into a situation, doesn't quite understanding what's happening to her, but is still there to do a job and still there to make things right. God, there's something about it that I just love. And I love this. I love the game. It's a JRPG, which is a passion of mine. 90s nostalgia, great music. Shit, it's awesome. Like, definitely a game to have in your library if you're a fan of the classics.
trying desperately, as I tweeted earlier, looking at the eBay prices for this game and weeping. Not that I have a console to play them on because of the lack of European release, but I would like to have it on my shelf. So that should speak to how much I enjoyed this game. Certainly, I'm very interested to see what the sequel does, especially after talking about it a little bit here and here in little bits and pieces. But I'm really glad I finally got around to playing this and made time to play it, especially after now, but especially in general. It's always been one of those things people have talked about that I've had a vague curiosity about. And, with First Aid Spray, especially with the bonus episodes, there have been several games that I've never played before when we've done them, and I've come out of them being like, man, I'm really glad I played X, Y, Z, and this is just another example of that, where it's like, cool, I've ticked it off, and I'm really happy I did, and it's going to be a nice, fuzzy, warm memory to look back on. Parasite Eve is a fantastic game, in short. Very happy with it. Steve, final thoughts on Parasite Eve 1?
They're pretty much echoing exactly what I said. As a embittered European who couldn't get the game through any straightforward means, I'm glad that I went through the extra mile and bought a copy, because it's a fantastic time. It's a fun adventure, it's got fun characters, and the music, the graphics, the gameplay perhaps is probably the only odd bugbear, but yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it, mate? Like, if for some reason you've listened to this bonus podcast and you haven't played the game and we haven't spoiled it completely for you, I fully endorse you go and find your time and you seek it out, because it's not too long. It's not honestly too difficult if you're just mainlining the main plot and just like dump all of your bonus points to damage. It's just fun time. It's grotesque, but in a fun way.
Well, nothing else remains for me but to thank our contributors and our Patreons once again. Support the show for as little as $1 a month to help us create more bonus content like this one over at patreon.com/FASprayPod. You can also join the Discord server to get in touch with members of the team and our community, discuss Resident Evil with us and other fans, and listen to the podcast live as it's recorded. You can find a link to the server as well as our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, etc. at FASprayPod.com. You can find the podcast on YouTube, Stitcher, Spotify and iTunes, and if you enjoyed the show, please do leave us a review where you can. It helps spread the word. Thank you to the panel. You can follow all of the Pueblo people individually. I'm at Arciniega_123. Steve is at FB Steve was taken. Burger is at It's Burger Time. And finally, thank you for listening and have a good week. She looks so much like Quisitis in that picture. It's sort of like...
It might as
You
well
think
be
it might have
Quisitis.
been...
Yeah. I read
Quisitis
actually...
with the hair down.
Yeah, I read that they... Apparently, when they were designing the character, they were going to do long hair, and then they got confused between that and another piece of character art, and they combined them, and they were like, oh, well, that's the character now.
That's funny.
So they wanted to do Lara Croft or their own interpretation of.
Oh,
And,
okay.
This looks nothing like it. It looks more like what if Cloud Strife let his hair down and was actually a lady.
That explains
know,
it. That's why I
he
like it
is.
so much. Yeah, that.
Well, I'd take a few more games with Aya over another 42 games with Cloud. No offense, I love you, Cloud, but sit down.
I like Cloud when he was Cloud and not what they turned him into, but that's for another day.
Welcome to Anything But the Final Fantasy VII podcast, where they
Never gonna
massacred
happen.
my boy, my deranged boy.
My poor confused boy.